On. This is the point where Cecil and I would make some comment about, counting down like Casey Kasem back in the day.
Oh,
Saddest words in the top 40 countdown were holding steady at number 17 or number 21 or whatever, because you knew your rise was over. The things I think about when I've got idle time. It's Orange and Blue today, brought to you by our friends over at Shop Honda. Andrew Mason, Jake Shapiro filling in for Cecil Lammy. Of course, Cecil is, as would have been said by the late Irv Brown, he is on assignment. I like that. There's an elegance to that.
See, I feel like I'm channeling Cecil because I had a fantasy draft last night. So like I've got a little Cecil in me today. So I have him in spirit. The information obviously won't be as good as your normal show coming from me, what Cecil's got, but I've got some thoughts on this Jaleel McLaughlin situation.
Good. Well, that's a good place to get in. But first, since you talked about your fantasy, I know I don't want to detour too much with fantasy. We were just having a conversation off air.
Mm-hmm.
How much did Russell Wilson go for in your dynasty fantasy draft?
So 2 quarterbacks.
Yes.
Superflex league. He went for $2, and it was by a Broncos fan. One Bronco fan bidded 1, the other bidded 2 at the end of the draft. So he could have been had by anybody. There's not a lot of high hopes on Russ. Shockingly enough, a lot of Broncos were, again, this is by people in Broncos country because these are my friends. I grew up in Colorado. We're not bidded on that high. Jerry Jeudy was the only one that went like above market value.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Usually there's an overvaluing of your team's players, but I do wonder if some of that is there's a psychology there going on. Like, okay, the last few years have been rough. Right. And people are so beaten down. I think that might have something to do with it.
Yeah. And, I drafted Brandon McManus and I was like, why did I do that?
Wait, okay.
Yeah.
All right. My thoughts on Brandon McManus are he's going to what appears to be a pretty potent offense. So I think that might be a really good pick.
Interesting.
With him in Jacksonville.
Yeah. But and obviously there's some sleuths out there, like because I watch Orange and Blue today frequently, like I got Adam Troutman for my bench just because I'm like, what if, let's see how that goes. But it's just interesting to see even the effects of this losing, as you're talking about, affect some of the hardcore fans that I've had, my whole life. These are Broncos fans through and through, and they're not like, all right, I'm going to overbid on Courtland Sutton because that's my guy. So I think the Broncos nation, I know Broncos country, as you guys like to say,
or Bronco land,
as John Elway once said. It's just been beat down, right, Mace? Like it's just been beat down for so long. And that's why when you see like a sparkle like Jaleel McLaughlin or like, like some of these younger guys or even Garcia over the weekend, you get excited because you're like, what if they found some value there that can actually turn into a player? And that's maybe the guy that can flip things around.
Yeah. And so I know on the sidebar, we got key players returning, but let's start with Jaleel McLaughlin. Let's just go from there because that was the topic that, of course, was on the slide promoting this. But it's interesting to see how he was used on Saturday. And can't say too much about the order of running backs, but let's just say it's trending toward Jaleel McLaughlin being the third running back on this team, which would certainly get him a roster spot. I'd say based on what we saw Saturday night, the fact that both of his touchdowns happened because of things he did. Like there are sometimes you see a hole open up, it's wide, and we'd say, oh, anybody can run through that. But McLaughlin gets his touchdowns. The touchdown run by making the free man coming through the hole miss. The touchdown catch by getting near the sideline within like not even an inch of the sideline. Stops, gets defenders to just sail past him, and then completes his pass to the end zone. He's doing things on his own. That's reaching kind of a special level of being able to succeed in this league.
Yeah, and the thing is with that run too, and I know Tony Jones had a big run right before that, but without his kick return, he wouldn't have. So he set up his own touchdown, which he performed well on that play as well. And, I loved that catch, and he makes the classic Chris Berman, whoop, move.
Yes.
That was literally that move if the Audible had like a Wikipedia page video entry.
I could hear it in my mind's ear actually when I was watching that. When I saw the defense, he was like, whoop, gone. can't get that high. Chris can go to another octave almost.
And so, and if you were constructing a perfect roster in the NFL, Mace, how many running backs would you have on it right now in today's 53 man?
Probably 3. Okay. And that's where this gets interesting because Tony Jones Jr. has not done anything to lose a roster spot. He's had a good camp. He had a good game on Saturday. He's a multifaceted special teamer as well. But you're also thinking about roster construction and who you can pass to the practice squad. And I think now that we've seen McLaughlin do it twice in a row and it's on film for everyone to see, it's not practice, it's game film, goes to all of the other 31 teams. I think if you expose him to waivers, you're going to pay the price and somebody's going to claim him. Whereas Tony Jones Jr., a bit older, I think has a better chance of passing through and being available to be on the practice squad. And then if you need him, you can call him up. But the calculus of this, I think, is leaning toward McLaughlin being an undrafted rookie who makes the 53.
I know for a fact that the Colts scouts watch the Broncos. I know for a fact. And
also, I can tell you, there were other scouts from other teams at the game because you see him in the press box. I know that Carolina, for one, had some scouts there.
Mm-hmm. And I mentioned the Colts just because we know the situation with Jonathan Taylor right now. We also know the situation, Mace. Their other running back, I think he broke his arm. So they're down to their third string running back already.
Yes.
If you're the Colts, you're easily putting a claim in on McLaughlin. And that's why I look at it and I say, that's the smarter way to think about it. Which guy can you sneak through to your practice squad? Because odds are in the NFL, one of Williams, Pirine, or McLaughlin at some point is going to go on IR.
Yes.
And you're going to need that fourth running back to then become your third running back. But is McLaughlin, by the end of the year, is he going to be like literally by usage the third running back? Or do you see him maybe sneaking away to getting into like second running back usage?
Ooh, I mean, you mentioned it with the injuries. And of course, McLaughlin could have an injury as well. But I could see him moving up to where it's no longer like a 50-50. I think right now we're looking at Pirine and Javonte Williams each having roughly the same number of touches. Like if I were projecting week 1, I would say Pirine and Javonte Williams each have 12 to 13 touches and McLaughlin has 3 or 4, right? But I could see a scenario developing where if one of those top 2 running backs gets hurt and you end up adjusting to where running back 1 gets 65% of the touches, and then running back 2, if becomes McLaughlin, gets about 35% of the touches.
The way I had it mapped out on my head, going into week 1, I was like, well, it's obviously going to be 50-50 because it's going to take some time for Williams. Mm-hmm. I really don't. Javonte is such an aggressive runner and so powerful. I don't think we're going to see what we saw out of Javonte Williams in the past until a little deeper into the season, even though he looks fine right now.
Certainly he wasn't there on Saturday. Like he looked to me about 85%.
Right. And that's fine. The Broncos will take that for now. So, all right, you got Pirine and Williams going 50-50 for now, but by the end of the season, I projected in my mind that Williams was going to be going from a guy it's every other series to, all right, this is your number 1 running back. So that's why this third running back conversation I find interesting because it can really throw a wrench into things. And when you think back to some of the stuff Sean Payton did in New Orleans, they really had a lot of great singular running backs, but also that secondary running back really did a lot of great things for them. And then at times they even have a third running back making some really big plays for them.
Yeah. I mean, you think of guys like, Pierre Thomas and Darren Sproles, right? There's always been a place for the situational running back in that offense. He's got I'm talking about Sean Payton when I say that he's got some of the Bill Belichick in him in terms of how he uses running backs because it can be very situational game to game. Like, okay, here's a matchup where a smaller back who maybe isn't going to go between the tackles as much, but is going to operate in space, is going to catch a bunch of passes. Here's a matchup where the smaller, quicker guy who can cut on a dime like Jaleel McLaughlin has a better chance of success. We're going to emphasize him in this game, and then maybe the next game you're talking about plowing it up through the middle And you don't see as much of Jaleel McLaughlin. You see more P. Ryan and Javonte Williams because it suits them.
And I'm just picking a random Saints season. This is 2012. They were 7-9, but that's besides the point. This is kind of what I remember.
That was the year he didn't coach.
Oh, well.
No, that's okay. But they were doing what he would do. Let's be fair, right? Yeah.
But and it was the same thing as the year before, but they ran the ball a little bit more this year. But it's Ingram 600 yards, Thomas 473, Sproles 244, Chris Ivory with 200. So you have not 3 running backs, Mace, but 4 running backs. And then this is the next year. Thomas 549, Ingram 386, Robinson 224, Sproles 220. So we're looking at this and it's 4 running backs. So I could see a situation, Mace, where 4 running backs make this roster just because of the situational thing you talk about, and then having that insurance clause, so to speak.
And then who becomes the primary pass catching back, because they did get Javonte Williams involved early in the screen game.
Yeah.
That 2012 season that you note, Darren Sproles only had 48 carries, but he had 75 receptions.
Wow.
He was third on the Saints in receptions, 75 for 667 and 7 touchdowns. And then the next guy at running back in terms of receptions was the aforementioned Pierre Thomas with 39 catches.
So we're talking a significant difference where it's like, obviously Sproles is in there with some designed catches, and more, Thomas is there with maybe some checkdowns.
And what's interesting also is, like, it's not like we're talking about this being greatly affected by missing time to injury. Sproles plays 13 of 16 games, has 123 touches. Thomas plays 15 of 16, 144 touches. Ingram plays all 16, 162. I mean, that is very much, it's a fantasy player's nightmare, but it's running back by committee.
Okay. Avoid Williams, avoid Pierre.
The history of Sean Payton says, with rare exceptions, Alvin Kamara, it's going to be recreating a top level running back in the aggregate, to use the Moneyball description.
Right. It is recreating that running back. And there is, I think, some value to this that NFL teams have found in the last 10 years, where it's like rotating defensive linemen to be more situational and also have that energy on, passing downs and rushing downs. They've gotten a little bit better about that in recent years. I think there's some value to that also in running back, where you have a little bit more energy to maybe get through that hole or get to that edge when you have different guys rotating in and out, so long as they're all at the level. And I think Williams and P. Ryan are definitely both guys that are like, those are starting level running backs in the NFL. I'm not worried about those guys. And we're seeing right now, Jaleel McLaughlin, maybe that's a guy who can also be, a number 1 running back. And, it's not been too long since the Broncos had an undrafted running back that ended up being good. And that's kind of where the NFL is going.
Yeah. And that's another thing with the Broncos. Like, if you look at their history, having running backs emerge from the ether of the late rounds in the undrafted pool, I mean, this is something to which we are accustomed around here, whether you're talking about Philip Lindsay or CJ Anderson. Like CJ Anderson, for example, he's a running back who was undrafted in the same year the Broncos drafted Monte Ball out of Wisconsin in the 2nd round. Now, sadly for Monte, he was struggling with alcoholism while he was here, and that helped lead to his downfall. And then CJ was there and kind of went through. But it was interesting to kind of look back at the Broncos at running back over the last decade or so. They drafted the late Ronnie Hillman in 2012, and rarely was he the primary back. They drafted Monte Ball in 2013, couldn't emerge as the primary back. I mean, even his rookie year, he was number 2 with no Sean Moreno. But CJ Anderson becomes a primary back for a decent stretch. He's undrafted. And then, of course, Philip Lindsay, a primary back in 2018 and 2019 with back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. So this is kind of what the Broncos do. And then you look at the late round backs of the Mike Shanahan era. This is something in which the Broncos seem to specialize, is finding these running backs in the crevices and nooks and crannies.
And I've always thought this, when you have a guy who's highly productive in college and just gets overlooked by scouts, yeah, there's a difference of being 5'9" and doing it against guys that are 6'1" versus 6'3". But generally speaking, if you are productive you are at the highest levels of production, at the level right before the NFL, you're going to find a way to be productive at that next level. Yeah, sure. Maybe you not be a Pro Bowler. You don't have that potential, but that's what I like in finding some of these guys that have great college careers that don't necessarily get the draft buzz, and you understand them not getting the draft buzz.
Yeah. The interesting thing you mentioned how productive he was. There are some teams that would look at a running back like McLaughlin, who had a heavy workload in college, and they simply won't touch him because they'd say, okay, how much tread does he have left on the tires? I mean, I remember that discussion coming up 10 years ago. I mentioned Monte Ball, but also remember Eddie Lacy coming out of Alabama.
Yeah.
But there are players who have overcome that. I mean, Derrick Henry had a heavy workload at Alabama. Didn't stop him from being.
Mark Ingram had a heavy workload in college.
He had a good career. So, it's everything is
Darren McFadden.
Yeah. Everything is its own individual kind of case. Right. But there are teams I know in their calculus of how they evaluate players that'll look at a running back and say, oh, beyond X amount of touches, he's not on our board. And I think that is something that happened with McLaughlin. So between that plus coming from Division II, then transferring to FCS at Youngstown State. By the way, Division II went to the College of Notre Dame, not the University of Notre Dame. College of Notre Dame is in Ohio, nicknamed the Falcons, not the Fighting Irish. Yes, I looked that up. I did not know that off the top of my head. I did look that up.
That seems like something you would know, though. I mean, between me and you,
I should have fooled everybody and said you and I have a lot of trivia at our disposal. A lot of stupid facts that we filled our brains with over the years.
If we were assembling like the foursome of Denver sports trivia team out of the Denver sports crew, I think me and you are like picks 1A, 1B
Yes.
for like, because like you've got like the Broncos trivia covered, and you've also got me and you like overlap on baseball quite a bit, and then me and you like have these weird like basketball and hockey things from the 60s and 70s. I mean, James Marilat with that Super 70s sports account, I think he needs to I want to go into his Twitter account one day and just mute it so he stops retweeting it every day.
Yeah, because I follow it anyway.
Yeah, I'm like, James, I'm there.
There's I mean, I like to retweet it as well, but not as often as he does. I think like James, it's like every day.
Yeah.
It's a great account though. If you're not following it, Super 70 Sports on. We're still calling it Twitter, by the way.
Yeah.
We're not calling it. Yeah, whatever. Anyhow, the news of the day beyond McLaughlin, although I think McLaughlin it's a very interesting topic because this is something completely unexpected in terms of how things are going to be dispersed.
Yeah.
But today you look out there, and not all the way back because they weren't necessarily doing team reps, but you saw Mike McGlinchey, although he was doing team reps. You saw Justin Simmons. You saw Brandon Johnson, which is very relevant because Jalen Virgil, he's likely lost for the year. There's a way the Broncos could get him back depending on
make the Super Bowl.
Yeah, make the Super Bowl. Yeah, if you're having the full-on meniscus surgery, it's a 4 to 6 month timetable. So, but the thing is, to get him back, they would have to waive him. Because by putting him on IR now to have him back in the season, he has to pass through waivers and then be brought back. Something similar happened with Brandon Johnson last year, although they didn't have him on IR. They simply waived him, let him do the injury rehab, and then brought him back to the practice squad and then to the 53-player roster. So tough break for Jalen Virgil, but getting Brandon Johnson back on the field, and Johnson looks like he's going to make this team. That's pretty timely, and probably can't say too much because it was not a practice open to fans and all that, although there was alumni out there, there were sponsors out there. But Brandon Johnson, basically in terms of how they were using him, and he was getting a lot of first-team reps before he left, kind of picked up where he left off, even though it was limited in number of reps because they're working him back.
And he's looked really good at times when he's gotten opportunities. And based off this Payton system we're talking about, you're really only going to see 2 wide receivers get a majority of the work. But I do think this third receiver is going to be valuable. I ask you, with the injury to Virgil, and I've heard nothing of this, and I've seen no one talk about this, why isn't there more buzz about maybe trying to get KJ Hamler back in the building?
I think they're in wait and see mode on KJ Hamler, and nobody's claimed him at this point. So with the phone not ringing on KJ Hamler, there's no urgency to do anything today. I think that's got something to do with it. You do like the fact that he has worked with Russell Wilson. There is timing and chemistry there. But I think with Hamler, if that happens, it's something where if they look 2 or 3 weeks into the season and he's still out there, then I think they look to bring him back. But the other thing also, because the skill sets of Marvin Mims Jr. and KJ Hamler, there's a lot of crossover on the Venn diagram between the two of them.
Right. Will we see McGlinchey play at all, do you think, in week 3 of the preseason?
No,
okay.
I don't think so. And I think I'm actually fascinated to see how they use him in the joint practices to see if he has a full workload, because that's going to be ramped up from what we saw today. Does he have a full workload against the Rams in joint practice, or do they ease him back in? I would say it may be more likely than not that the workload is full or very close to it for him. He looked okay out there today. It was in shorts. It was in the field house, but he did not look like he had any issues from the sprained knee.
What I really want to see out of the offensive line is cohesion and getting reps together, because of that is, I don't know, there are very few positions on the field that require as much communication as the offensive line and being together as a unit. And that's one of the things I want to see McGlinchey out there just practicing with those guys. So I think that's one of the valuable parts of joint practices is there's the wrinkle of you don't know what's necessary. I mean, you know what's coming based off the situation, but you don't know the play per se. And you're going to have to solve that issue with your teammates.
Right.
And I think the joint practices, you can make a case they're just as valuable for Mike McGlinchey as they are about anybody.
I would say so, because you want to get him some competitive reps here before the season starts. Make sure he's back up to speed. I mean, someone like Justin Simmons, I would argue, maybe doesn't necessarily need that, only because Justin looked very ready to go at the start of training camp. McGlinchey, it was a little rough when he got out there early in training camp, and he was getting beat from time to time. Also, you talk about the communication and the cohesion, getting everything right. That was something I asked Quinn Miners about today, because, of course, Quinn at right guard is the neighbor of Mike McGlinchey. And, he expounded upon that. And you want to get to the point where they're communicating with gestures and looks. And that's another thing. If you can communicate with like a look in the eyes almost, or just a little thing that nobody sees, then you know what? You're in a pretty good spot.
If they're neighbors, does that make Russ the leader of the HOA?
Oh, gosh. Don't even get me started on HOAs.
No.
Bunch of busybodies, black jobs. I'm still bitter about the HOA in my parents' neighborhood that wanted to get the basketball goal in front of the house torn down when I was a kid.
I have a reason to be bitter.
I have a very low view of HOAs.
Yeah. I'm not gonna go all the way in on that one. Do we have any other key players you wanted to note coming back? Because I did have some things on joint practice I want to talk with you before the show ends. But
yeah, I mean, though, you kind of looked at them at Simmons and McGlinchey, Brandon Johnson, Tyler Beatty was also back out there. But you kind of look at how things have happened. He was ahead of McLaughlin before he got hurt in terms of how they were being used. But you watch practice, you could kind of see that McLaughlin had a little more juice to him. And now we see McLaughlin, he appears to be ahead in terms of that algorithm. For Beatty, it might well be we're talking about a practice squad spot for him going forward. So,
yeah. And you need those practice squad running backs, because, again, there are situations we've seen very recently in Broncos past where you end up on RB7.
Yes. Oh, it's happened. It's happened many years as well. And the other, don't forget, Chris Manhertz out there as well as a blocking tight end. So that's,
is he going to make the roster?
I think so. The question, I mean, I think honestly, I was doing a 53 this morning, and I may revise it in the wake of Brandon Johnson being back today, because I did it before practice. I had Manhertz on the 53. I had Nate Adkins on the 53 too. I did not have Albert Okwuegbunam on, even though Albert O had his best blocking week, not just game, but week. He had a very good game. Of course, he had the block of Marcus Haynes out there in practice last week. Has Albert O figured out something as a blocker? That could be the rogue element in shuffling the deck at tight end here. Maybe you keep as many as 5 and go light at another position.
See, and they had 5 last year, if I remember correctly, right?
So
yeah.
It's not unprecedented.
I don't understand this with professional sports, and I'm wearing the Nuggets shirt right now.
By the way, it's a Nuggets Grateful Dead shirt.
Which someone has commented it's the most Boulder shirt Jake could wear.
Yes, it's brilliant.
Thank you.
I mean, I guess the only thing more bolder would be if it were a buff rather than the Nuggets, but okay.
We'll take it. We'll take
Yeah.
Maxie the Miner as a Grateful Dead bear.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you about this because I see this all the time where it's like Shaq can't shoot free throws. Why doesn't he just learn how to shoot free throws? To me, it's like Albert O has known for 3 years now, the thing holding his game back is blocking. And my first thought as a sports fan is he's a professional football player. You think he could get out there and learn how to block a little bit? Why can't he do that?
It's a good question.
Why hasn't he done it till this week, I should say?
Okay. With blocking, if you're an effective pass catcher, generally speaking, you don't have to be a devastating blocker to be a viable player. You have to be a willing blocker, right? That's a phrase that's thrown around a great deal. Shannon Sharpe, for example, Hall of Famer, played here in Denver and, of course, in Baltimore for a couple of years. Shannon Sharpe was not a great blocker, not a particularly effective blocker, but he was a willing blocker in that he would be an obstruction. Albert O hasn't been at that level, but now he has. You wonder if somebody just, lit the firecracker under him at some point and said, look, Albert, if you don't do this, you're not going to be here. You got to figure this out. We've done all we can, because I feel like in the last week, something has changed because he looks like a completely different player on the blocking end. And he didn't catch a pass on Saturday night, but you know what? He can do that. He knows how to run routes. He knows how to find space in zone coverage. That comes naturally to him. That's not a deficient area of his game.
And what's interesting to me about it is you would think that someone would think, hey, I've sat for 10 games in a row last year, Albert O. My career is in jeopardy. I need to learn how to do this thing. But there's also the situation where it's just like, all right, my boss doesn't know that I'm good. I'm just going to sit here and he's not going to fire me. And then the new boss came in, Jerry Rossberg, and was like, this guy is awesome.
Yeah.
So maybe it really did take, okay, Sean Payton's a respected coach. This coaching staff is actually respected, to be like, dude, like, you're really not going to play in the NFL if you don't figure this out.
I also think the other thing is it takes the right kind of coaching, right?
Yeah.
And I think there are some players that don't need the extra confidence. They don't need the push, the prod. Everyone reacts to something different, right? Maybe it wasn't a firecracker up the butt, but maybe it was a heart-to-heart conversation. And that was something I did notice with Albert O those last couple of weeks last season, is how much individual instruction he was getting just in the open to media parts of practice from Jerry Rossberg, usually. Just working with him one-on-one. And they were working on blocking. It was almost like Albert O, what is most effective for him instructionally is somebody who's looking out for him. And someone who, and some players respond better to the arm around the shoulder than the kick in the butt, but you have to figure out what that is. Now, this is where Sean Payton and his background, I think, comes into play, because he worked under Bill Parcells, of course, in Dallas. And there's an awful lot of Sean Payton that comes from Bill Parcells.
Yeah.
But the thing about Parcells that was his gift was that he individualized the instruction and the style of instruction for players. Everyone looks at him, and sees the video of him yelling at Phil Simms or yelling at other players and all that. What isn't as seen is that he knew that there were some players he had to handle differently. And this is going into a real kind of history of the game discussion. But Bill Parcells, his big break in the NFL came from a coach, the late Ray Perkins, who brought him onto the Giants staff. He was going to be on the Giants staff, and then he left. Like, he basically quit and then moved back to Denver. He'd been coaching Air Force. He moved to the Giants staff, leaves the Giants staff in 79, goes back to Denver, and actually I think is like selling insurance or something like that for a year. And then Perkins brings him back on the New York Giants staff in 1980. Now, there's a lot of, in terms of the butt kicking and the chewing out, there's a lot of Ray Perkins in Bill Parcells. What Perkins didn't understand and why he eventually failed as a head coach was because he didn't have another gear. Like, it's my way or the highway. And for a player like Vinny Testaverde back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Vinny Testaverde was Ray Perkins' draft pick in 1987, number 1 overall in Tampa Bay. Did not work out there. Perkins, but after that, Perkins is fired. Testaverde leaves in free agency for Cleveland. Cleveland is coached by Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick has worked for Bill Parcells. He gets okay, we have to individualize the instruction. And Testaverde starts to flourish. Eventually, Testaverde goes to the Jets, takes them within 1 game of the Super Bowl, losing here in Denver at Mile High Stadium in January of 99. It was a very good, It's a very good Jets team. It was one that a lot of people a year later thought was going to go all the way. In fact, our friend of all of ours, Steve Atwater, was cut by the Broncos, goes to the Jets in free agency, coached by Bill Parcells with Belichick as a defensive coordinator. And the thought was, Steve might get 3 rings in a row because everyone thinks they're going to win the Super Bowl. And then Testaverde tore his Achilles in the opening game, and they finished 8-8. But the point being, Payton has that Parcells in him of, all right, some guys, they need the butt kicking, but some guys need the reassurance. Mm-hmm. I'm going to individualize this to them to get the most out of them. And I think maybe something that they have done instructionally has clicked with Alberto. That's my long-winded theory on it.
It would be a fascinating development for the Broncos, and it would also offer them, especially if they are going to run 2 tight end sets, which seems like could potentially happen, especially the fact that they listed a fullback in their starting depth chart.
That's Sean Payton for you, though. He loves the fullback.
Right.
Mike Burton's on this team.
Well, it's a very quick adjustment to 1 running back and 2 tight ends from running back, a fullback, and tight end. So
this is true.
I could see them, finding a little way around the system instead of having the ability to have an amazing tight end, which is what a lot of the great teams in the NFL have right now. But having 2 really good tight ends would be really valuable to this team, particularly because they're really big targets and Russ has struggled a little bit to pass over the middle.
Yeah.
So,
and you need that. And the thing is, Russ actually wants to get the tight ends involved. There was a reason why they drafted Greg Dulcich last year.
And there's a reason why not New Orleans, but the Seahawks went all crazy for Jimmy Graham from New Orleans.
It's the one, he wants that. It's the one thing that's been missing. Kind of like we talked about with running back. I think it might be recreating it in the aggregate because there's not an alpha, but it bears monitoring. Now, what's also going to bear monitoring tomorrow, the first of 2 joint practices with the Los Angeles Rams, who are coming in here. Of course, the last time there was a joint practice here in the Mile High City, it got a little heated with the Dallas Cowboys. Randy Gregory was kind of at the center of some things. There was a full-scale fracas. I'd say multiple. What is the plural of fracas? Is it fracases?
Fracai.
There aren't enough .i plurals in the English language, by the way.
We can make it happen.
Yes.
A Donnie Bry, a Donnie Brooks.
Donnie Bry? Donnie Brooks. I think I like Donnie Bry. So Fracai, Donnie Bry. I guess Scuffles. Okay, we got to stick with the S on that one. But it was interesting. Like, I asked Jewel about what to expect tomorrow, and he kind of had a twinkle in his eye, about, I got to maintain control of things. I think what happened last year for everybody who's back on the Broncos roster, it's on their minds, especially on the defensive side, knowing how things just got completely out of control. I haven't seen a practice get as out of control as the one with the Broncos and Cowboys last year.
And I was just about to ask you about that because today, and I don't even know if you've seen this yet because I've seen some of your day, the Colts and the Eagles had a full-scale brawl at their joint practice. Earlier this year, the Jets kicked out the Buccaneers from their joint practices, making them have a random, spontaneous joint practice with the Giants. It seems like the joint practice this year, practices across the NFL this year have been very heated. And you look at this Rams team who are not going to be very good, but they beat the absolute snot out of the Broncos a couple months ago, just a couple months ago. And you add in the fact that the Rams haven't had a lot of top draft picks. So they've got a lot of guys that went in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round, undrafted guys that are fighting last second for roster spots.
Yeah.
You have a lot of Rams players trying to prove points. And then you have the Broncos trying to prove points of we're better than the team than last year. I think this has the potential to be full haywire, like blow up type deal.
And I'd say the Broncos, that's also a team, Sean Payton even mentioned it today. There's a lot open at the back end of the roster right now. There's a lot of guys that could sneak into those spots. So you've got, and also having the joint practices this late, we are literally 1 week away. And actually, as we record this, a couple of hours under 1 week away from the cut to 53. So it's a tension convention on both sides. And when you've got, and sometimes when those strings are too tight, they burst. And that's what we may see out there tomorrow. Wouldn't surprise me. Even though the Shawns, Payton and McVay, they're going to try to keep things under control. But that sort of stuff just happens naturally in the process of things, I think.
Where does Sean McVay go for dinner tonight in Denver?
Okay, it depends where they're staying. Now, I imagine, you know what? I imagine they're staying somewhere here in the Denver Tech Center because you don't want to go very far, right?
Right.
For joint practices. I think Sean McVay is going to the steakhouse of his former boss, Mike Shanahan's Steakhouse. And it would not at all surprise me if he's dining with his former boss.
That's kind of where I was going. Yep.
Yes. Maybe I should go over there, scope it out. You know, I mean, I just put on some. I'm wearing. You can't see. I've got
wearing gym
on.
shorts.
I got gym shorts. They're, you know.
Oh, you just got the gym sneakers on.
Yeah. I mean, I've got some Air Maxes on shoe wise, but I've got a belt.
You do. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not wearing the Nike workout shorts. You know, I have been known to wear those underneath the desk on camera. By the way,
I'll be wearing those very soon because our boss has left the office.
I think I'm pushing it even with shorts, but I mean, look, I was out at training camp all day.
It's been 100 degrees the last 2 days, and I don't even have air conditioning, Mace.
Wow. We're under a heat advisory. How are you holding up in that place, by the way?
I'm great. Everything's great. We got a little evaporative cooler, and we make it work. But last night, fantasy draft, like I mentioned at the start of the show, I was sweating not only because of the draft, but I was like baking in a brick room. And I was like, I felt like, you know, because this brick is terracotta. And I felt like when you're in the garden and you have those brick thing or the terracotta set up with the water you use for evaporative planting. I know way too much about having
this is like, we could do a show on this.
Yeah. I felt like I was the human embodiment of like my body heat escaping through the terracotta.
Actually, you know what? That actually sounds like a great way. Like if you want to lose some weight, I could always use a chance to lose a little weight. I need to be in a place like that.
Yeah, just getting a brick room, 100 degrees.
Brick room, 100 degrees. Let the pounds just melt away. I don't know. I think I'll just stick to 1,000 to 2,000 yards swimming a night. That seems to be going okay. So
I thought you were going to say a season. I was like, wow, that's a big season.
It is. But anyway, thanks for joining me, my friend.
Yeah.
This is fun.
Well, we're doing it again. Denver Sports Tonight. Me and Mace from 6 to 7. So join us.
Except Jake is driving. We agreed I would drive this show. Jake would drive DST. So let's see what the dynamic sounds like over there. Hope you'll join us.
It's a big fight. It's like an old married couple.
He's Jake. I'm Mace. This is Orange and Blue Today, brought to you by our friends over at Champ Honda. Cecil will be back with me tomorrow to discuss those joint practices and if things got heated with the Los Angeles Rams coming to town. Matt's over not behind the glass. He's at the desk monitoring us, making sure we stay on air and on task. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Orange and Blue Today. Take care.